I just want to thank you for coming on to tell your story. So let's go ahead and jump right into this. What's your name and how old are you?
My name is Marty Sierra, and I am 59 years old.
And can you tell me a little bit about yourself and your life growing up?
Growing up, I had a good childhood, but a rough childhood. I had a mother who didn't really know how to love me. I wasn't told very much that I was loved or I was beautiful. And my parents went through different times in their lives where we were good, and there was times where we were bad, and times where we had food, and times where we didn't have food. And through all that, I know now as I look back, the compassion that I have has come from growing up in a poverty state. And I don't no longer live in a poverty state, and it's a mindset. God has called me for bigger things, for richer things, and even this, sharing His word. It's a rich word that He's given me.
What were some of the things you were dealing with during that time?
Growing up, one of them, like I said, was poverty and lack of having love for my mom. And they fought a lot, and we left a lot, and we came back a lot. And growing up with never feeling like I was always running, like we were going somewhere. Mm-hmm. And there were times, my mother suffered also from mental illness. And back then I was a child, I didn't understand it. I understand it now. And so I was the youngest at the time, and I remember, and I was always the one being placed in different places because everyone wanted the little one, the sweet one. And I do still remember that. And I was protected as a child, and I know being moved from different places when my mom had to go away for a little bit. But now as I look back at mental illness, that's also a thing that God has brought me to understand, that it's real and it happens, and it's generational. Can it come? It can come, and what it is and how to handle it and how to pray against it. And if I had not grown up in that type, I would not know I would think they're just weird or things are going on. And I got to deal with people who were going through difficult times, and I understood, and it just made me love them even more,
Can you tell me more about how that made you feel when your mother didn't love you properly and just getting, placed into different people's care?
I think it made me feel like I didn't have any self-worth, that I was just a child being not cared for. She's just, and I know that my siblings, especially my older sister now, she tells me that, when I was younger, when they were gone away, because they were older than me, that she used to cry for me, that all she wanted was her little sister. But to me, even growing up, now as an adult, I no longer lack with who loves me or who wants me or who needs me or where I should be placed. But growing up, I did never think I was worth anything.
What was a specific moment where you felt God or you knew that He was real?
I was in my 30s, my mid-30s, and I was pregnant with my third child. And my sister had already been a believer for years, and she had been praying for us. I love my sister. We loved my sister, but we used to make fun of her. We'd be at family gatherings, and she'd roll up, and I said, "Oh, here comes the holy roller. Oh, here she comes." And me and my brothers would well, my sister, once she became a believer, she knelt down and she started praying for us. And I was going through a difficult time in my marriage, and she invited me to church, and I thought, and I'd been Catholic all my life. That's all I knew. But at this time, the religion was not helping me with where I needed to go. And I went to church with her. And right there in that church, the Lord spoke to me loud and clear, "Come to me." I went to the front altar, and I accepted Christ that day. And at the time, I was, like I said, pregnant with my third child. And I was 8 months pregnant. And my husband was being unfaithful and left me for someone else. And it was a really hard time for me because I couldn't figure things out. You know, I was a mom. I was a helicopter mom to the other kids. I was anything I needed to do for my kids. My kids were in cheerleading, I was a cheerleader coach. My girls were in Girl Scouts, I was a Girl Scout leader. My kids were in PTA, I was a PTA president. Anything, that's all I knew how to do was to be a wife and a mom. So after that, we got back together, and my life changed. I started going to church on Wednesdays, then Sundays. The hardest thing you do is you go to church and all of a sudden the problems start arising. He came back home and the accusation started, oh, you're having an affair at church, oh, you're doing this, oh, you're doing that. And I kept every Sunday battling to go out that door and battling when I knew we came back from church. And eventually he walks in the church one day because he wanted to know what I was doing. And he did come to know the Lord through that perseverance of going and knowing what I was doing. And it was a struggle for a year. We did it. And I fought every time I went. I fought every time I came home. You know, I've have fought my entire life. And, you know, the Lord's always fought for me. So I never had a fear of what was going and what was coming.
And I want to touch bases, and if you can elaborate a little bit more about being Catholic.
Yeah, it's a lot different. We used to go to church Catholic Mass on Sundays and immediately go there and go to the beer store, and my husband buys beer, and that was his beer for that Sunday afternoon or whatever, watching a game. I didn't have a relationship until I was able. I knew the Rosary, I knew the Hail Marys, I knew the Our Fathers. So everything you're taught by the fathers and the nuns. And I went to catechism on Sunday, but I didn't know even going sin. You know, you had to, in order to take the bread on Sunday or to drink, you had to confess to the Father the day before. Otherwise, you were unclean until you confessed to a man. And when I came to know the Lord, it's not about confessing to someone. It is Him. It's a one-on-one direction. You know, that's between me and you, not between me, you, and Him. And then as I opened the Word and I started reading these stories and understanding and comprehending, that's what taught me. I thought, these are real people. These are real stories. You know, I don't have to walk around with a St. Christopher on my neck to protect me. I don't have to pray to the Virgin Mary, you know, because I have a one God that I serve.
When you say you had to confess your sin to like a person, a man, could you elaborate, like, how different is it now since, you know, you're not Catholic anymore?
Because you're going and you're telling a person, you know, I lied this week, or I did this day, or I did that, and he's telling you, well, you no longer will do this. Now go say 15 or 20 Hail Marys or Our Fathers and this and that. So it felt shameful, like I was having to tell someone the things I had done, and he was forgiving me, but in order to be forgiven, I had to do what he asked me to do. And now, as a believer, I don't go to God in shame. I go and confess to Him, you know, the things I've done, and I'm immediately forgiven. You know, I'm covered by His blood. He's already died for my sins. He's just asking me to speak the things that are heavy on my heart, or things, you know, because it even happens, you know, on a daily basis, you know, and I have to ask God to forgive me. You know, I was at HEB yesterday, and this lady runs in front of me, and then she sticks the finger at me, and I just smile, and I'm just like, okay, Lord, you know, I'm sorry for whatever I did to her. But see, that's the thing. If it had been something I had done, I would have had to wait till Saturday, gather up all my sins, and then on Saturday go talk to this man and ask him to forgive me for those things that I've done.
Like a pivot moment where everything just like began to change, like you start to feel the change, you start to see changes.
I immediately went in head first and started going to everything the church offered, and I joined a women's group with her, and we were going through a series called Experiencing God. And I remember they called me up for prayer, And I remember the ladies touching me and praying me, and I remember being out. I fell to the floor. The Holy Spirit, that was the first time ever I felt that. And it was like I was laying on the floor, like I was floating on a cloud, and just so much peace and surrounding. And that's when I woke up, when I knew, God, this is real.
What did surrendering your life to Him look like for you?
Surrendering my life changed my life, because now the things that I was allowed to do, drink and do sinful things, came into the light that you can't do that and then be forgiven and then go back and do it again. You have to surrender your heart and know that I'm going in all the way, and I'm going to follow a God who loves me and has my best interest at heart. So surrendering was really hard, because now my whole life needed to shift and change. And now I know other people were going to see me as a different person. Now I was going to be the holy roller walking up into family events. And, growing up, even with my kids when they were small, a birthday party was a birthday party, but then here came the coolers with the beer and different things to celebrate a 2 and a 3-year-old birthday party. And now the mind had shifted, because it's not about that. It was a whole change that I took in, and I thought, I can't walk on that thin line of, okay, we can do this sometimes and not. God said, you're going to walk with me, and we're going to change you, and people are going to see a different you.
And also, how did that make you feel when you were changing on that?
I felt like an outcast. I felt like, people looked at me different. They were going to talk different. But, even now at 59 years old, and all the changes and some shifting God's done right now in my life, I still feel like that sometimes. I still, when I walk into family events, they see me, or I say something and someone comments something, or they're being, you think you're better than others. I don't think I'm better than others. I'm just like you. Almost like even as an adult, I still feel that. As a believer who's been a believer for 28 years, I still get that same feeling as I walk into a room. And I'm not. But God says we are to be set apart. We're in this world, but we're not of this world.
And after accepting Christ, how has your life changed since coming to Christ?
As I mentioned earlier about my husband had been having, an affair, and he left me at 8 months pregnant. I stayed with him. And throughout the marriage, it never stopped. And and if God hadn't showed me how to love him in a different level, I think I would have been quick to run and go the other way and divorce him or leave him. Physical abuse stopped. Mental abuse didn't stop. Control didn't stop. And the affairs didn't stop. And, I don't say this much, but in our marriage, this is probably one of the hardest things that you'll have to admit as a woman. I had already been my 5 kids, and I go to the doctor to have my yearly checkup. And the doctor walks in, and he says, he'd been seeing me. He delivered my kids, and my youngest, Seth. And he says, I have some news to tell you. And I said, yes. He says, you have an STD. And I looked at him and I says, I don't understand what that is or how I got it. And my doctor knew me. He's known me very well. He says, well, it's sexual transmitted disease. And that was probably the hardest thing any woman would have to. I had done nothing ever in our marriage, being married 28 years, never been unfaithful. He never thought, I'm going to pay him back. Even when he was doing what he wasn't supposed to do, and I was on my knees praying that he would walk away. And I left that office and got to my car and just wept. And I thought, Lord, why am I being punished? I've done nothing. Mm-hmm. I've stuck by my husband. I've prayed for my husband. I do everything for my kids. Yeah. And when I got home, I called my sister. And she started praying for me. And then I called my pastor's wife. And she came over and she prayed for me. And we prayed and we wept. And at the time, he was in the military 20 years of our marriage. So he was away, and he came home. That happened to come home a couple of days later, and I approached. I didn't with anger, but I told him, you know, look what you've given me. And I have never seen ever in our 28 years of being married his face look like that. It dropped. He never said I did or I didn't. And that weekend we fasted and we prayed, my women's group, and I went in that Monday because the doctor said, you need to come back because I'm going to have to do a further test. I'm going to have to go in and bring someone with you because it's going to be a little painful. And I walked in that Monday and by myself because I was too shameful. I didn't want to take anybody with me. Sat on that table and they started getting me ready, and he says, I know this is hard. He says, I prayed for you this weekend. And I said, thank you. He walked out and he walked back in. He got ready. The nurse comes in. He starts looking and he says, wait a minute, you need to get dressed. And I said, okay. And I thought, oh no, it's really bad. Gets dressed. He comes back in. He says, I want you to know that in all my years of being your doctor, being a gynecologist, being my specialty that I am, he goes, I've never seen this, but today I've seen it in you. And I said, I don't know what you're seeing. He goes, what you had on Friday, you no longer have. Wow. And I sat there and I just wept. And I said, my God, my God. When the Friday before I was, why have you forsaken me? Now, my God, my healer. And I went home and praising God, and my husband knew where I was going. And when I came back, he says, are you okay? I says, you know, God healed me. And he said, what? I said, God healed me. Wow. And he said, why? I said, because he's my God. And that was probably in my life one of the biggest miracles that I've seen in my life. And I thought, you know, Lord, I'm not going to ask you why because I know why. You know, here I was doubting, why am I doing this? Why do I keep going? Why? Because for 20 years he traveled with the military and I stayed home to raise 5 kids and I worked. And in those 5, one of them is special needs. And I have another one who has a heart condition. And then you have the boys who are always involved in different things. And God spoke through me through this because I did not know at the time. I kept saying, I'm trying to be a good wife and a good mother. So I poured everything into being a good mother because I felt a lack of being a good wife because he was always unfaithful. And when God healed me, he showed me, you were never lacking anything. Never. And as a woman, I always thought, you know, for my entire life, I fought for my kids. I fought for my marriage. I fought for my husband back from other women. And God said, I'm going to show you. You know, you are worthy. You are worthy. About 7 years after he ended up passing away, when he got sick and did not tell me he was sick. He was coming home to retire from the military. We found out he was ill at the hospital 2 weeks before Easter. And took him to the hospital. He wasn't feeling good that morning, went in, and a doctor walks in, and I look at him, and it says oncologist. And I was like, and he goes, nice to meet you, you know, Ms. Flores. And I was like, I don't know you. And he looks over at my husband and he says, she doesn't know me? He's been seeing me a year already. And I said, I don't understand. And he looks at him, he said, you didn't tell her? And I was like shocked. At the time, you know, I had my 4 kids at home and my son was actually stationed in Afghanistan. He was in the military. And he says, well, your husband doesn't, we've been talking about this, he's chosen no treatment, and I gave him a year, and I said, when did you give him a year? He says, I gave him a year ago. And so as I sat there, I looked at him, and he didn't know what to say. And he says, but as of today, I'm looking at everything. He probably has about 3 months left. Well, as the week went off, the 3 months went to 3 days. And he says, we need to call your son home. And we FaceTime my son. And as a mom, that was one of the most painful looks I've ever seen on a child, is when his father he was telling him, son, I don't have much time, and, they've only given me a couple of days. And my son's like, I'm not coming home. I'm not going to come home because, if I don't come home, you won't die. And he didn't have a choice. And 3 days later, so many flights later, no sleep, my son shows up at the hospital. And by then, my husband had been a medic in the military. And by then, his organs, everything was failing. He was already on his kidneys were failing, so they had him on dialysis and machines. And through this whole thing, he just kept saying, you're not going to put me on pain meds. I'm not going to do any of that. He says, because I'm going to see my son, and I'm going to talk to my son. And my son got there and got to see his father. And for the first time in 2 weeks, he raised up out of bed, and he hugged his dad. And we left the room, and they talked, and they wept, and we came back in. And then that night at midnight, they met with all of us, and they said, it's time to take him off the machines. And you're never prepared for death. You're never prepared. Even though you know what's coming, you can't prepare anything. And they sent us upstairs to a suite, and that got him comfortable on a drip. And the doctor said, we don't know how long it's going to take. And that day, the pastor called and said, hey, do you mind if I bring the worship team? We'll worship. It's Wednesday night. Do you mind? I said, absolutely not. Well, that whole day we had time to spend. He could hear us. And what my kids did is each one of them jumped in that bed and spent time. My son and him were movie. They loved the movies. So he put his little headphones on. They watched a movie, and every now and then his favorite movie, and he would smile. And my daughter had a music thing with him. They loved music. So she got up there and put her in, and she sang to him and prayed and wept with him. My son was the youngest, Seth, and he was 13. But him and his dad had a Marvel thing with collector's items and little figurines and comic books. So he played on his bed with him. And my daughter Faith, special needs ones who doesn't talk, she was just there touching him and loving on his head, touching his head, and would lay in bed. And my daughter, which was the youngest, Destiny, she just crawled up next to him and laid next to him. That's all she wanted, was to lay next to him. And that night, he passed away. But it was the most, as my daughter Abby was singing his favorite song, in the middle of that song, I put my head down and I counted his heartbeat, and on heartbeat number 5, it stopped. And that was the most peaceful, they had prepared us. They had a class for us. Death can be this and it can be that. They had brought a teddy bear in to see what it's going to look like. And I remember the night before we were talking, before he went under, and he says, I want to ask you for forgiveness. And I had been waiting for that for 20-something years. And I looked at him, and in my mind I was thinking, I want you to say what you want for forgiveness for. I want you to say every word. And I looked at him and I said, I forgive you. I didn't, at that time the Lord was telling me, you don't have to bring that pain out in him. He's already suffering enough. And I didn't. Up until several years ago, I kept thinking, Lord, all I wanted him to say for all the times I was unfaithful. And God told me, well, how about all the times that you've sinned? I haven't asked you for every word. And he died very peaceful. And I know at that time that, I walked in that hospital a wife, and I left a widow and a single mom. And you know, for 20 some, I had pulled myself. I paid all the bills. I carried a household because he was always gone. I took care of, and when I left that hospital, it was like half of me, half of my heart was gone. I could pull myself out of bed. I had to get up. I then forgot to pay bills. I forgot to do this. I forgot to do that. It was like I was in a state, that's what mourning is. You don't know how to pull yourself up, but God pulls you back up. And he says, I'm not done with you yet. One of the things that I know that my daughter has brought up during that time is I had a prayer closet. And I used to go in that prayer closet and close the doors, get on my knees and cry and just weep and pray and just anything. That's what I did. When I became a Christian, I made me a prayer closet right next to my shoes and everything else. That was my time. And I remember when I was going through this, my daughters, I didn't know, but they were down and she was knocking on my door, and I was like, I'll be out in a minute. She says, Mom? I said, yes. She goes, can we come in? And I said, no, I'll be out in a minute. We'll go get some ice cream. It'll be okay. We'll be fine. I'm done praying. As I was in there, I had makeup and different stuff to get me ready. So when I came out, I looked like, you know, I was fine. And she says, Mom, she says, do you know every night I go to sleep crying? Do you know every night that I feel what you feel? She says, please let me in. And when I opened that door, her and her little brother and her sister were sitting there looking at me. And they crawled in my prayer closet. And we wept and we cried. Where I was trying to be strong, they were suffering. And I let them in and we wept and we cried. And I asked for forgiveness. And I asked for forgiveness from the Lord because he said, you don't have to. Come to me with your tears. Come to me with your children. I am your husband. I've always been there. And so as, you know, things got better for me, which they did, I started, you know, I just started praying and, you know, Lord, I want to be out there and I want to serve you. And I met a lady who had a homeless ministry in Dallas off of Malcolm X Boulevard, which is a very hard, rough part of town by Fair Park. And I started going with her. And about a year and a half, she stood up there and they said, we can no longer do this. She says, we're going to have to stop. My husband got another job. So we'd go every Wednesday, hold Bible study and feed people under the bridge and love on them. And at that time, the Lord says, it's your turn. And as I sat there, my best friend started serving with me. She didn't know what we were getting into. Neither did I. I raised my hand and I says, well, next week I'll be here. Not even knowing how we were going to do this. And she looks at me and we left there. She says, besties, what are we going to do? I said, if God's called us through this, he's going to call us to it. We're going to walk through it. So for 7.5 years, that was my training ground right there on Malcolm X. Every Wednesday. Mm-hmm. Loving on people, feeding them, praying them. For 1 hour and a half, every Wednesday, there was a spot they could come that they would not be judged. They would be fed a meal and they would be prayed over and even given a Bible and clothes, whatever we had.
Mm-hmm. Wow. That's beautiful. I'm over here tearing up, of course. There's things that you have said is just so powerful and so true. When you are equipped with Christ and you understand that you are a sinner too, but I'm just saved by grace, then it all changes. What would you say to someone who doesn't know God yet?
You're missing it. God has so much for us. He has so much to offer, and he's not asking. He's not taking your life away. He's going to change your life. And, you know, when I left that, you know, when my training field for 7.5 years, and then God called me into the mission field, and now he's extended grace and mercy, and I'm able to travel and go to different country and pray over people and the gifts that he's given me. You're missing so much, so many gifts that he has for you. And I once heard someone say, God gives you a gift, and if you don't use it, you've missed it. He'll move on and give it to someone else. But I want everything he has for me. I want all that's good. That's good. My life's not perfect, but I don't want it to be perfect, because the only perfect place we have is heaven. So as long as we're here on earth, I don't want a perfect life. I want to fulfill what God has for me. And the last couple of years, as I've stepped in more and more into ministry, he has revealed a lot other gifts. I don't always, prophecy, gift of healing, ministry, just all kinds of gifts that the doors that he's opening. And out of obedience, I'm going to continue to walk in his grace and mercy for whatever he has to offer me. I don't want to miss it, not anymore.
And is there anything you want to say to the next generation?
It's, I have, I'm going to call him a prodigal child. And he is 24. And I'm going to tell a really quick story about him. Seth, for 7 years, we've been coming to this church. And for 6 of those years, Seth sat on the back row of church with his little earphones on his phone, either playing a game or listening to music. But there's always been a rule in my house that as long as you live with me, you're going to go to church. It's not an option. You can go to your church or you can go with me to my church. A year and a half ago, Seth was at work and he was T-boned by a car. They passed a red light and they T-boned him. And his whole life shifted in that moment. And for a year, I watched him struggle because now he had back problems. If you had known Seth a year ago, he was in a walker. And 7 months ago, he was healed in a healing service here at church. And to watch your child shift from someone who didn't even have a relationship with Christ to now, we were watching the Passion of Christ the other day, and he is explaining everything and telling the backstories. And as we're sitting there, I'm looking over him and he's naming every disciple. And I was like, Seth, how do you? He says, Mom, I've been studying. If I know something, I study it. And my Seth now has grown so much in the Lord that now he says, Mom, God's got a different direction for me now. I'm going to see about going into ministry. I'd like to be a youth pastor, who knows, a therapist. He goes, we've been through a lot in growing up. I've been through a lot. It took him actually 10 years to finally forgive his father for leaving. He never wept, not even at his bedside when his father passed away. He didn't even weep then. But when God came in and he discovered a relationship, he was finally able to let all that out. And he said, Mom, had I never had that accident, I thought the accident was bad. But the accident put me at a place where I needed to be still, where I needed to hear, where I needed to see my miracle, where I needed to see my change. And, as a mother, to pray for the next generation. This is thing heavy in my heart, is that I'm praying for the next generation, that I'm praying for you that are out there, that are saying, I don't have a purpose. You have a purpose. I don't have a calling. You have a calling. God didn't say, I created you. I created you for a purpose. I created you for a calling. I am the Jehovah Rapha. I am the Jehovah Nisi. I am your provider. And to watch him and to listen to him now on a different level. To watch him to say, look at me, Mom. Yesterday, a couple of days ago, he had a minor back surgery and he's recovering. And I said, we went into the surgeons. He's been waiting a year and a half and since his healing. And the day after he got healed, he was actually he got healed on a Sunday and he was supposed to have surgery on that Tuesday. And we walked in the office, he told his surgeon, he says, I don't need it, I'm healed. Well, on our way to the hospital, he had him stop and do a CAT scan and an x-ray. And when he looked at him, He's standing there. He was bending over. He had not been able to bend over, touch his toes, nothing. He was in a walker. And he walks in, and the nurses are looking at him like he's a ghost. And they're like, Seth? He's like, yes, ma'am. And when we sat there, the doctor looks over, and he looks at the scan, and he looks at the CAT scan. He looks at the X-ray, and he said, Seth, how you feeling? He says, I'm fine. Look, Doc, I can touch my toes. I can move. So he's showing off. He's doing all these moves. And the doctor looks at him, and he looks at that. He said, I see the same back that I've been seeing for a year and a half. You still have 4 bulging discs. Your sciatic nerve is still sitting on the bottom one. But the young man that I see in front of me is not the same young man that I've been seeing for a year and a half. And you have a miracle there, Seth. And he said, so what do I do now? He goes, well, today's my day off, Seth. I can go play golf. And when we left there, we both looked at each other. I said, I didn't know he was a believer. And Seth's like, I didn't either, Mom. He said, he says, you know, and this morning when I got out of bed, I told the Lord that every single day that I got out of that bed, that I would no longer let him run after me, that I was going to be running to him, and that I would do his work every single day I got my feet out of bed. And so he said, so when we were at the doctor's last week, he says, I can get you next week, April 6th, in for surgery. And I'm looking, I'm like, well, wait a minute. And says that, absolutely, I'll be there. We're ready. And I'm like, well, so quick? He says, Mom, we got to do this because I have, you know, he's also in the youth ministry, so he's helping with the youth. He's an assistant. He says, we have youth camp coming in June, and I'm going to go to Guatemala on your missions trip with you in July. So we got to get this going so I can keep moving. So those of you who are waiting for a miracle, your miracle's already there. You are our future. Get those shoes on and get running, because God says, I'm here. I haven't gone anywhere. I may have shifted things in your life. I may have thrown a couple of side curbs or, you know, things that, but you know, I've made you, and you are here, and you are stronger, and I believe in you. And watching, you know, my son go through this, the prayer of a mama's heart, I can tell you, don't ever, your prayers are heard. The timetable is God. And when you watch the miracles happen to your child, whether they be, I watched him on a table scream and cry, Mom, this hurts so much, to the next time in the hospital, God, this hurts, but you are here, and I feel you, and I know. That was a big shift from a year and a half where he was screaming and crying for me. He used to say, Mom, can you please go to God and pray for me, because he doesn't hear me. You have a direct relationship to him, to now, I've got to pray, Mom, this morning. You know, God knows me. And I would say, son, God hears your prayers before he hears mine, because they come from your heart. Not that they don't come from a mama's heart, but I don't need to intercede. And that shift in who he is, and this shift in this mom's heart that says, God, you did, I never stopped. You know, those of us moms that say it's out the door, I'm tired, I do it all the time. Don't ever stop praying, because this is this is the future. These are our children. Don't stop. God said it's called Then and Now. It's a Boston trip that our church is forming, that we are going to take young adults in September. And they're all young adults, because God says then and now.
Thank you. Thank you so much for telling your story on the Miracles of God. Tell your story.